Good morning, everybody. So excellent. And I'm hoping that this morning you will find value in what I have to share with you. I will also make available the presentation to Vakeshni for circulation. So let's get right into it. I've got a couple of slides that I would like to share, and also I'm hoping for some good Q&A. So let's move on. Vakeshni, if you could, there we go. So I'm going to focus on three things this morning, meeting minds on the risk basics. So I've taken time to just share 3 or 4 slides. I'm not exactly sure out of the 290 odd people that are attending what the level of risk understanding is. So I thought it appropriate just to add a slide or two to meet minds around the basics of risk, and then to start the argument around why I believe that the integration of risk with strategy and resilience is a very important step forward, especially from the lessons that we've learned in the recent past and currently. And then lastly, just to close off with talking about, so what is required from the risk professions, from boards, from directors for this to actually happen? So let me kick off with the definition of risk. Simply put, effective uncertainty on objectives. And I think here are the 2 key elements that I want to cement in your minds. And that is, the first is the word uncertainty. And this is where the challenge currently lies with the risk profession. Mostly, we present a risk register as what we believe the risk profile is all about. And then the other word that I would like to talk about is objectives, the effect of uncertainty on objectives. And if you think about the way that organizations define or set objectives, it happens in the strategy setting, or at least it originates out of setting strategy and then the business plan that evolves out of that. And so knowing what could happen, the effect of uncertainty on objectives, become the premise of this presentation, in as far as saying risk cannot just exist as a function in isolation. It has to do with the future, and it has to do with uncertainty, and needless to say, it has to be linked to objectives. And I'm going to get to the argument where I talk about risk not just being part of the execution, but certainly part of the development or the design of an organization's strategy. But before we get there, let me just do a very simplified process of risk management so that we can just meet minds around how it really works. So having said that risk is the effect of uncertainty, where do we find the uncertainty? Well, we find it in events, changes in circumstance, and a change in a situation. Obviously, having said that it's the effect of uncertainty on objectives, risks must always be linked to objectives, not just the execution thereof, but also in the design and the setting of these strategies or these objectives. And then a very key understanding is that one can only address a risk, one can only change a risk if you have the right causes identified to that risk. And if you understand the causes to the risk, one has to also appreciate the consequences of this risk materializing and the likelihood of those consequences, not the likelihood of the risk, but the likelihood of the consequences materializing. But risk is not just negative. Risk is just risk. Risk also has a positive element or an upside to it, an opportunity. And so the idea would be that when we look at a risk, that we look and search for both. How can we do less of the bad, but how can we do more of the good? And again, please make a mental note of this: less of the bad, more of the good, because that becomes a critical part of this morning's presentation. And then how can we achieve that? Well, we have to put in place control. We have to put in place a treatment plan that then very effectively addresses the causes to the extent that we have identified the right causes, the right controls, so that we do less of the bad and we leverage the positive out of the risk management approach. And so that is simply put what we are trying to achieve. But what we have realized is that there is one part of risk management, actually two parts, and we'll get to both strategy and resilience a little bit later. But even in the way that we word our mandate in risk management, is that it is a coordinated activity to direct and control an organization with regard to risk and opportunity. And here I want to create the link between the word direct, direction, and directors, because the board of directors direct an organization. And how do they do that? Well, one of the elements is by setting strategy, by defining the direction an organization should take. And this is, again, not to want to belabor the point, but this is the premise why risk and strategy should be integrated. When you look at the fact that risk is a structured and consistent approach that, again, aligns strategy, processes, people, etc., etc. And then right at the back end to ensure sustainability. Now, that is the link to resilience, which we will talk about a little bit later. So I thought it, appropriate just to maybe leave you with that meeting of minds around risk management. And then very briefly, so why do we do risk management in companies, in organizations? Well, it is about confidence in our shareholders. Shareholders want to know that we are looking to the future, that we consider uncertainties, and that will ultimately be reflected in the success of the organization, and that we can make better decision making. And here is the fourth element of this morning's presentation, is to integrate strategy, risk, and resilience so that we can end up making better decisions, more confident decisions. And as you'll see a little bit later, given the context in which organizations find themselves in today, these decisions need to happen in a complex environment. They need to happen in an environment that's changing on the drop of a hat, and these decisions need to be made very quickly. And that's the value proposition of integrating strategy and risk management. Of course, we don't want surprises. I suppose we can have long debates around whether COVID-19 was a surprise or whether it was just the elephant in the boardroom. Be that as it may, risk management is supposed to diminish the element of surprise. And then, having a risk as part of your organizational culture, a strong risk culture, obviously supports the notion that organizations can respond to a crisis, can learn from the crisis, and can emerge improved or better, that there's betterment, out of the inclusion of risk management and embedding of risk management in the business processes. Okay, so having said that, I thought it appropriate, being an IOD SA presentation, that I just create, and I'm not going to spend time on this slide. You'll get the pack and you'll be able to read through it. But there are some really key elements in this slide about what is expected from the board. And this was in King 3, and I've just taken a selection. And then also in King 4. And I think King 4 now started moving towards talking about this whole notion about uncertainty, the speed of change, the complexity of change, and talking about advances in technology, and you'll see all the sexy words in there, the happen quickly, the pace of change, and the significance of disruption, and then interestingly, opportunities and risks. The one that I want to focus on is about organizations should strengthen the processes that help. Now, I wanted to actually stop there, because if we need to strengthen the processes of help, this is one good reason, if not the ultimate reason, to integrate risk in every single business process. The two that I love to talk about is the strategy, the setting and execution, and then decision making. And so if we can achieve that, then the second part of this that I've just highlighted at the bottom is the anticipation and the response to capturing opportunities and managing emerging risks. I thought it a good idea just to bring King in. And now to talk about, so why does IRMSA talk about the need to integrate strategy, risk, and resilience? well, I'm going to take a step back, and in the next 2 slides, we'll use some examples, and then I will talk about the whole, I spoke about a little bit earlier, the whole idea about less of the bad, more of the good. But let's start off with, so what does an organization need to prosper? This we got from last year's masterclass. We did a masterclass in 2019 on strategy and integrating strategy and risk. And some of the global research provided by TDAG, the Decision Advisory Group, was that there are 3 things in today's environment, and that was now in 2019, that will differentiate you from the person or the organization next to you. And this is with specific reference to the 4 IR, sort of sexiness around talking about the 4th industrial revolution and what does that mean for us, and all these pop-up companies that put large, well-known 100-year companies to waste. And that is that you need your organization to respond to its customers, that you need to be different from the next person that's providing the same service and or product than you, and that your price needs to be more competitive. So my customers come first. I am special. I'm unique. I'm the Facebook. I'm the Instagram. I am that new one, and I do this at a price that is cheaper than everybody around us. And if organizations then achieve this, if they can get these 3 things sorted, well, then they create value for their stakeholders, and one can see it in the share price, and one can see it in the support they get from stakeholders, shareholders, and the like. However, when you now look, and I've quoted the international markets, but more specifically, in one look at the South African market in the last 2 or so years, you'll see good examples from Sasol, Steinhoff, Stutterford's, Woolworths, Edcon quite recently, where things did not go well, where organizations did not, let me say, perform well. They are still around. All of them are still around. Maybe Edcon not for too long, but be that as it may, and we can add a whole lot of that there. And the story now is, why did they fail? Why did these companies, well, that's a strong word. Why did they go through rocky roads? And I put it then that it's about misses, mistakes, and malice. Those are the 3 reasons. And you can look at Sasol. I should have actually added Eskom there, because Eskom and Volkswagen probably the 2 most, or the 2 best examples of malice. But be that as it may, let me talk about those 3 words: misses, mistakes, and malice. So when organizations do not do what they should have done, and Stutterford's is a very good example of that. They failed to evolve. They failed to meet their customer needs. And so Stutterford's sadly no longer part of our retail sector. That's misses. When we talk about mistakes, well, that's when organizations do what they shouldn't have done. And here, for example, I suppose the best example here would be Woolworths with the acquisition of David Jones. It was an expensive buy. It failed. There were some impairments happening, and very quickly, this decision hurt Woolworths tremendously. Now, I think what's important here is to highlight very clearly that misses and mistakes happen not because people are bad. It's happened by well-intentioned executives, but I believe because risk management was not considered or was not part of the strategy setting and the decision-making process. And then lastly, I want to talk about malice. And this is just where one deliberately acts against the interests of the organization. And we have Eskom, Steinhoff, we could have added Volkswagen there as well. So in saying that, here's my hypothesis around integrating strategy, risk, and resilience. The risk capability is mostly concerned, well, I'm generalizing now, but risk is seen as doing less of the bad, as preventing the bad from happening. So doing things right and with downside protection we're just focusing on doing less of the bad. This may, and I want to capitalize the word may, this may help in preventing malice. And with my experience, my personal experience, I don't think that's a safe bet, but be that as it may, it is not as well positioned as preventing misses and mistakes. So we should focus that misses and mistakes result from strategy. So if misses and mistakes evolve out of good strategy, then another good reason to implement risk management or to integrate risk management into the strategy setting space. And now is not the time to talk about what the benefits are that risk management can bring into that space, but that if we are going to look at the companies that have failed, and we are at some point convinced that misses, mistakes, and malice can be prevented by integrating good risk management, well, then the whole idea that King brought forward, that if we look into the future and we look carefully and we do good risk management, that we will be able to respond to risks and opportunities. And so for an organization to survive and thrive, I believe that we just don't need to do less of the bad. We also need to do more of the good. In this case, not just do the right things, but also do things right. So we protect against the downside, but we also protect, and we also position ourselves to leverage the upside. And here's the big link. Here's the link. I spoke to you in the beginning. I shared with you the whole definition, very simple definition as captured in ISO 31000, the effect of uncertainty on objectives. And since strategy is about the future and the few, because we spoke about directing, directors. Since strategy is about the future, and the future is uncertain, certainly if we are going to make strategic decisions, and it's going to be made in the context of uncertainty, what better place to integrate with is risk management. So yes, good strategic decisions will follow a good process, and we're going to get to it in a couple of slides from now. But that will create that value around knowing what my customers want and to respond to that, knowing how to be different in a leveraged way, and hopefully that the contribution of doing less of the bad, more of the good would reflect in the decision-making process, and then ultimately into your stakeholder satisfaction. Now, this uncertainty, and here I bring in decision-making. My point now moves from integrating strategy and risk. I hope that I've brought that across with some conviction. Now I'm talking about, so where does that then link us to when a board needs to sit, or an exco or a public organization needs to sit and make decisions in complex environments at pace and every single day? Well, make sure that we have a good decision-making process. And I'm going to spend a time just sharing an example with you, because good processes do lead to bad outcomes, but good outcomes don't necessarily are a result of good processes. And I'm going to try and explain that to you in the next slide or two. So organizations typically employ three capabilities, and we've spoken about all three of these. Maybe not so much about the business continuity management one, but we'll get there. So a strategy capability to focus the organization in the right direction, a risk management capability to protect against the downside, and then business continuity should things go wrong. Well, here is the next lever that we will need to pull, and that is, in most organizations, these things run independently. As a matter of fact, from recent experience, there was some risk maturity work that we had done. Risk sometimes finds itself in the compliance space, or more often than not in the financial space as part of the CFO structures. and ultimately, more often than not, in the internal audit space, which is something that you don't care where you sit. It's who do you integrate with, who do you virtually run the race with that is important. And I think that's where the argument from IRMSA now gets put forward, that integrating strategy, risk, and business continuity management. And if you can put the those functions on an integrated way, we will certainly be in a better position to address mistakes and malice. Yes, it is important that we drive up the maturity of these functions, having mature strategy processes, decision-making processes, risk management capability, and BCM. That's certainly important. And driving the maturity in an integrated way will even be more fruitful. Having achieved that, and I would have loved for organizational resilience to have been a little bit bigger, but those three things integrated at a mature level will certainly contribute to organizational resilience. So, talking about the future fit risk manager or the future fit risk profession, just want to summarize before I move into the decision-making example that I wanted to share with you. It has to be, risk management has to be more than a process or a function. For you to become a risk intelligent and a resilient organization means integrating strategy, risk, and resilience. You have to embed risk management into your decision-making process. So what does that mean? It means that a risk register per se is probably archaic at the moment, because we report this at the end of the quarter and not when decisions are required to be taken. And here, the whole discussion around what does the board need to be able to direct becomes very relevant and prevalent, because we need risk intelligent leadership out of the Chief Risk Officer's office. We need to be sitting at the right table so that we can provide the information that talks back to the definition of risk, the effect of uncertainty on objectives. So we need to become more predictive. We need to be able to model, to create scenarios, to be able to monitor and report these scenarios on an ongoing basis, to update them. But the question is always, so how much time do I spend in reporting a risk register at the end of each quarter versus making available to our boards and our excos these tools that allow for us to look into the future, to be able to contribute to the mistakes and the malice, and to leverage the opportunities that we see in those. And of course, it does impact on our people, our skills, our adaptability, etc. This is a lot easier said. To build this slide is a lot easier than having this rolled out into the organization, and then also to apply this and to make this practical. I want to just talk about this a little bit more, and this is the whole idea around a good process for decision making. So value destruction results from mistakes, and malice. And I've got some, I'm not going to spend time in here. I've got this slide just using some really good examples of mistakes and malice. And then also part of the circulation, I'm sharing a video with you that actually supports this point quite nicely. But what I would like to bring to you is an example, and it works a lot better when I could see you and I could ask a show of hands. But this is my example. My example is we are all at a party. All 290 odd of us are at a party, and we have a little bit too much to drink. And half of us decide to drive home ourselves, and the other half decides to take an Uber. Now, you can now work through the example yourself. Driving home yourself, the risk of being involved in an accident, the likelihood is higher than taking an Uber. But then the outcome is we get home safe. The drivers that drove home intoxicated got home safe. Us that took the Uber, we were involved in an accident. And so the question then is, driving home yourself was always a bad decision, irrespective of the outcome. Taking the Uber was always the good decision, irrespective of the outcome. And so the point I'm trying to leave you with here is that we, by integrating strategy and risk, and by integrating risk management into decision-making before they happen, at least we're making sure that we are following a better process for decision-making. And so here I move into the resilient space, because where we made the wrong decision, but the outcome was fortuitous, that's just good luck. Where we made the right decision based on a good process and the outcome is bad, that's just shit happens. And so this is quite an interesting visual, you know, and to understand that a bad process, good outcome is just dumb luck. A bad process, bad outcome is I told you so, it's poetic justice. But a good process, good outcome is deserved success, and a good process and a bad outcome is shit happens. And it's in that space that I want to talk about business continuity and the ability to be resilient. Because good things happen to good people, but bad things also happen to good decisions. And it's in this space that I created the link, so that we understand the need for why do we also have to integrate not just risk management with strategy, but also with resilience or with business continuity management. So I want to leave you, I've got 5 minutes before we go into Q&A. I want to leave you with a couple of thoughts around how do we build this closer alignment between value creation, strategy, and risk. And it's all to do with the role that the Chief Risk Officer is going to play in the organization. It has to be one of a strategist. So we need to, educate is maybe not the right word, skill. We need to upskill ourselves. We need to create knowledge and awareness. But more importantly, we need to participate. We need to make ourselves indispensable when the board and the exco and the governance structure, or the company secretary and the head of strategy go on their breakaway and they start thinking of directing the organization. We should be part of that. We should be contributing through at least the first 3 elements of our risk management process, which is stakeholder and objective, communication around those, the environmental scan, the context analysis, and the risk identification. And if we then add to this the whole ability, or the whole paradigm that we need to break, that risk is far more, far greater than just a risk register. It is about understanding our context. It is about environmental scanning. It is about scenario planning, scenario building and interpretation, the creating of alternative futures. It's all about that. And that should also form part of the pack, the report, the board pack, the exco pack that we provide. And we provide it timeously. We provide it when it's necessary for decision making. So risk management for sure is not 4 times a year, part of the board pack at the end of a quarter in the form of a risk register. Far more required, and the board should insist on asking for more. Catalyst, we should be engaging leadership. We should have opinions, and we should have opinions that are linked to the strategic objectives, not just opinions. They should be linked. They should be linked to the strategic objectives. They should be linked to the performance indicators, because the whole idea about stop telling me and start showing me is where risk management will gain ground. That's where we will be able to link strategy with risk, with resilience, and we will be able to use key risk indicators, key performance indicators as our mirrors, as our sounding boards, where we will be able to train behavior. We will be able to talk constructively around things like risk appetite, predictive capability, and the like. And then obviously, as we need to build this capacity, we need to have the right structure, capabilities, and so on. When I talk about discovery, and I may have alluded to this already, this whole idea about risk sensing is all about early warning. It's all about those benefits that we spoke up front. It's all about influencing the direction that the organization is considering taking through the board and through the exco, and be able to influence that, but influence that through relevant information that we get from the tools that I've discussed on the previous slide. So risk sensing, instead of just a regurgitation of other people's views around things that are going wrong in our organization. What about the things that are going right? What about the things that we're not certain about, that we count with confidence, establish the consequence, the likelihood? We don't even considered controls for this yet. So part of the emerging landscape or the early warning landscape. Preparation, I spoke about scenarios, I spoke about alternative futures, and I hope at this point you can see that the skills required by what I believe, what IRMSA believes the future fit risk professional is all about, is not all found, are not all found within ISO 31000 or within COSO. There's a whole drive to break this paradigm and to start integrating and collaborating with the IOD, with ASA, the Actuarial Society of South Africa, to talk about quants and how can we bring that into our risk profession, to talk about building strategy and scenarios, etc. And we spoke about early warning indicators, big data, the whole idea about using data so that we can add a quantitative support to our qualitative views and reporting that we do. So where do we need to transform? I think I have spoken about this at length. So this is about knowing where we want to take the organization. We spoke about culture. We spoke about the integration of strategy, risk, and resilience, data analytics and technology, and this whole idea about the monitoring of this emerging risk profile using smart analytics. You know, all the sexy words that are used, artificial intelligence and those sorts of things. I've seen that in practice. And so we need to think very differently about the way forward. But certainly, I hope that I've at least left you with this idea that integrating strategy, risk, and resilience is the right thing to pursue going forward. This is a slide. I see that my source has nearly been cut off at the bottom there. Many, many years ago, I attended I can't remember if it was a workshop or a conference, but it was something presented in the Western Cape, and they've got a big Chevron facility there, and this was about project risk management. And a guy called Grant Purdy, many years ago, used this slide in a training session that I attended. Grant Purdy from Broadleaf Consulting. He used this slide. And this slide, in hindsight, and I'm talking about maybe 13, 14 years ago, this slide became known to me. And this is typically just a PMBOK. This is a process management or a project management slide. You know, the 5 stages of the PMBOK project management, where you think about, old Robbie Williams in one of his songs talk about thinking, or contemplating, thinking about thinking. That's the concept phase. And then we start putting sketches to it, and maybe we start putting money to it, and then we have a plan that we execute, and then it starts making money. Now, having seen the slide, I fortuitously stumbled across it again. This is such a cool, practical example of how we can get it right, but how we mostly get it wrong. So risk management, let's just generalize. Risk management, whether we talk about strategy, not setting, but execution, or project execution, mostly, I don't know if you saw that animation. I brought my arrow in right there. We are called upon, once all the decisions have been taken, and we now have to do less of the bad. We have to make sure that the wrong decision gets executed as best we can. And that is called poor front-end loading. The FEL is front-end loading. But if we can consider involving risk management in the concept phase, where we think about things, where we think about the direction of an organization, then we have good front-end loading. Then the chances of success by design are far better than then bringing in risk management at the execution phase. And I do appreciate the fact that I'm generalizing, but I just thought this would be a marvelous example just to share with you. So who achieved this and how did they do it? Well, firstly, they added strategy and resilience to the risk playbook. They also transferred ownership of risk management into 20% of their time is spent looking at near misses, mistakes, bad decisions, and the like. 30% of the time they spend on having a very effective risk register in place, but 50% of the time they spend dealing with the future, thinking about the future, trying to create alternative futures. They have a very strong risk culture in their organization, a risk culture that says whatever you do, risk is part of your toolkit, which alleviates a lot of the pressure on basic risk management that needs to be executed from the center or a center-led function or a centralized function for that matter. So cultivating a strong risk culture really assists in doing this. And then the word integrated risk management, not enterprise-wide, but also integrated risk management. And here I am not for 1 minute shooting down the integration with compliance, internal audit, and the like, but I am saying the integration that I would first do is to integrate risk with strategy and with business continuity management / resilience. We need to collaborate. We will, for certain, the ones that got it right had very strong collaboration with their strategic partners in the organization. The performance management team had strong relationships with the business planning function. More often than not, strategy and business planning ended up being the same function. And then also talking to the people that own the information in the organization, the data owners, the information owners, on how to make sure that they could build key risk indicators and have the data as and when they require, so that they can inform the board around a potential breach in appetite. They could monitor decisions that are parts of board packs and supply support information around that. And then the point I was talking about on the latter slides of my presentation, and that's adding quantitative risk intelligence. There's the saying that says, if you present information without support, with qualitative support, you only have an opinion. And I think that's one area where us risk professionals can start adding quantitative support to our qualitative reporting, so that we can show the impact, and we can also be predictive in nature. And then I think I touched on the last one, is saying our reports will certainly have to look very different. Our reports will have to be linked to strategy, to performance indicators, to key risk indicators, and then also to very constructively and very openly talk about risk appetite as set by the board. And I do believe that if we get this right, then we will end up becoming risk intelligent and resilient organizations going forward. It's 20 to 10, and so right on time to open up Q&A. Okay, shall I, I'm just going to scroll down and just respond. Given that risk management does not necessarily create absolute certainty or eliminate surprises completely, is the objective thereof then not to help deal effectively with any unforeseen elements, i.e. ensuring the org has necessary processes, systems? It goes without saying, thank you very much to anonymous attendee for the question. Indeed, there's absolutely no way that we can do enough to predict the future, but we can build alternative futures. And then just to, I did ask the IOD if it was okay if I share my shit happens slide, but sometimes, in spite of good process, in spite of good risk management, things do go wrong. And when they do go wrong, believe me, risk management cannot walk away from it. We cannot say, now it is the business continuity management people's task to deal with this. And hence the idea that, yes, we will never be able to predict the future. We can do and try as good a job as we can. We will do good process, but we understand that taking the Uber may also land us in an accident. And if that happens, we need to have our business continuity management in place, because shit does happen. So I agree with you, and that is indeed what we are after. How do you fully integrate risk management with strategy, performance management? Oops, it's going. Governance, do so in an agile manner. Well, I do believe that that is the responsibility of, firstly, the risk management team, the chief risk officer in lead. I do believe it requires the organization to be influenced to have SMART objectives. SMART being that a strategy is simple, it's manageable, it's achievable, it's realistic, and there's a time frame posted to that or connected to that. That translates into the same SMART objectives for the organization, which is then measured through performance or key performance areas, key performance indicators. And once we have a very strong basis at that level, that is when risk management could, with confidence, design key risk indicators. So what does that mean? It means that we can ask the right questions before performance dips to monitor and track those indicators, to be able to predict that performance or that decisions may and have gone wrong. And then ultimately, you know, and I'm back to the risk register, where you have risks that have been assessed with a relatively low likelihood. As a matter of fact, my own conviction is that you don't care about the likelihood, but should the consequence be rated high, for each of those risks, one should build business continuity management plans. They should be built, they should be tested, they should be owned, and they should be reported to the board and ExCo. I just want to make sure that I've answered that question fully. Okay. Bridget, are these tools available for modeling and predicting scenarios to be used by directors? I don't, well, let me first say yes, of course. There are marvelous tools out there that you can use for modeling and for prediction. They all start with trustworthy or data with integrity, of course, but yes, there are. And I just wanted to just leave you with, to be used by directors. I'm not exactly sure a board of directors will use those tools, but I do believe that this is where the collaboration between the strategist, the risk professional, and the resilience owners within the organization come together to be able to present a board with that picture. But I do understand the question, and I would like to say that we should be offering this to our board of directors. As a matter of fact, they should be asking us for this and not just be happy with the risk register. Albert, the biggest challenge, there's a lot of theory, which many are very familiar with. However, how is this practically implemented? Perhaps get some practical examples of real life scenarios. I hope that I've spoken about that a little bit already by telling you how this works. I have some cool reporting examples that I can share with you. There are a company or two that we can check with them to make the CRO's information available to you, that you can maybe contact and talk about those. The funniest thing, and this will sound odd, but ESCOM actually has some really cool examples on how they do this. Especially, and I'll use the example because I know the example around conductor theft and the example around solar flares. And Robert Koch, I suppose, would be happy to share that practical example. So there are really cool people out there doing very interesting things. Busisiwe, thank you for the presentation.
Continue. Can I just maybe ask if anybody wants to raise their hand, should they want to speak to you live, and then you can continue with the next question. So you can continue, Chris. I just want to ask anyone to raise their hands now if they would like to ask a question.
Okay, so can I continue, Vikesh?
Yes. Yes.
Okay,
sorry.
so Busisiwe, thank you very much. And this is maybe to add to Albert's question from a practical point of view. So at which point of the strategy session should the risk issues be considered? as we discuss strategy, or do we consider strategy and before we finalize, then consider the potential risks? Brucey, this is a collaboration between the strategy and the risk or the chief risk officer way before the board starts their discussion. It includes understanding the environment, understanding a detailed stakeholder analysis, stakeholder objective analysis. It does have business impact analysis information. This is a complete plan that the strategist and the chief risk officer and the team get together and prepare to form part of the pack that circulated to the board prior to the breakaway, prior to the discussion, because you want this information to be part of the discussion, not once we've already crystallized some ideas in our minds. Oh, and then here's the chief risk officer with his little bit 4 o'clock in the afternoon, or 3 o'clock when we're all ready to fly back to Cape Town, and now all of a sudden the CRO wants to say why all of the day was lost to us. So certainly as part of the entire strategy setting process, and it is something that must be part of the risk management plan. This is an ongoing, fully fledged job. It is an effort that happens throughout the whole year, because understanding your internal and external environment, your environmental scan, your building of scenarios, your predictive capabilities, your checking of the global risk landscape, all of that information should be upkept all the time and then presented as and when required. And I also do not believe that strategy setting is something that happens once a year. If you have information that support the board appetite and support the fact that this appetite may be breached, certainly at some point in that time, strategy will have to be reviewed. And I think COVID-19 is an excellent example of where strategies need to be reviewed in a very awkward space in time. I hope I've answered you, Brucey. Thank you very much. While we understand and often are aware of risks that may impact our small organizations, tend to have personnel that multitask because of size, and thus inevitably, yes, indeed. Neo, indeed, this is something that IRMSA, well, we're all keenly aware of, and IRMSA is looking to, in the later release in their guideline later on this year, or the next release of our guideline, is want to address a response to SME where people do multitasking. But I just want to say, whether you are multinational or whether you are a one-man band, risk should be part of your culture, should be part of your thinking process, should be part of how you approach things. Because if you make a decision, like I said, if you follow a good process, which includes the consideration of risk, then we should all be multitasking around that space. Angeline, good morning. Thank you for an interesting discussion. Lots to convey in a very short, yep. Most of it has been around negative. Where does opportunity, oops, it was not bad decision, but could have, the opportunity presented by the lockdown almost slows the company down to the increase. Okay, so doing less of the bad, doing more of the good, opportunity identification. Angeline, we possibly could take this offline, but the whole idea that risk is just risk, and that the entire risk process is not negative or positive. It has to highlight both. And when we consider the first 3 elements of the process, which is stakeholder analysis, objective setting, context analysis, and the identification of risk, in that process, the conscious approach must be not just to identify the negative or do less of the bad, but do more of the good as well. So I may just then update the presentation with a little bit more around that. How do you rate the importance? Rafilwe?
Chris, Rafilwe has actually raised her hand.
Oh, okay.
Talk. I'm going to allow her, Rafilwe, if you could please unmute yourself, and then you can actually ask your question.
Good morning. Thank you. So Chris, basically I wanted to highlight the notion that for companies to win in the 20s, less focus should be placed on planning and predicting and more on learning faster than their rivals adapting to constant change, constantly trying to design a company of the future, embracing the business imperative on diversity, optimizing social and business value. How do you rate the importance of those 12 months and 3-year financial forecasts at management meetings and board meetings, respectively, moving forward? Because those can really take up quite a lot of time.
Yes, they do. I do believe that there needs to be a total paradigm break in as far as the point that you raise is concerned. We can talk at length about the time boards spend looking at the annual financial statements, boards spend on integrated reporting versus what they spend thinking about the future and thinking about risk management. However, I just wanted to get back to your first, how you narrated it was an excellent definition of what resilience means. Resilience is not just to have a plan in place. Resilience is all about what you've said, learning and being able to take decisions on the fly, and diversified accountability to allow people to learn from their mistakes and to be better afterwards. So just wanted to make a comment on that. How do I rate the importance of 12 to 3 to 5 to 10? As a matter of fact, Refuel, I actually don't mind that. I don't think it is a bad or a good thing. I think they're only as valid as the paper they're written on at the moment, because things change so quickly. The concern I have with it, it is more often than not pursued as casting concrete. And we being the risk profession, has a big role to play. And that was the point I raised around linking strategy to business plan, to performance indicators, to key risk indicators. Because we are the people that can reflect on this, not through just financial projections on how sales will go, etc., but to be able to link key risk indicators to that, so that we can add value for boards to start challenging what they have in front of them, whether it is a 12 or a 3-year or so on. So I think that is the key thing that we need to start doing around this idea that when we've written a plan, that is the plan. And I can tell you, there are good reasons for those. We never talk about, let me not say that. Hardly ever do we talk to our boards about risk appetite. They've set an appetite for the organization, and that's about it. It's in file 13, and every year we rip it out and we wordsmith it, and there we have the new appetites. But how many companies do you really know that report on risk appetite in their quarterly risk reports, that they report on it on integrated reporting? Very few. And why? Because we don't have the right tools in place to be able to inform board whether they progressing towards achieving risk appetite or breaching risk appetite and the like. And if you want to be able to do that, then for us to be able to have well-informed, well-designed objectives, smart objectives linked to key KPIs, KRIs, and the like. And that would put you in good stead to be able to then start challenging, and maybe not challenging, by adding value to the discussion, instead of just having this notion that we just plow through all of these financial results. And it's not just financial, by the way, it is many other things. I hope I've answered your question. Okay. Arthur Linker, good morning, Arthur. Morning, Chris. Thank you. Critical success factors to trigger practically getting things. So top critical success factors to trigger practically getting things going with the exec and board. Oh, this is a very, very, when I do, just to say, Arthur, when I do risk maturity assessments, my first slide that I put up says, are you serious about maturing your processes? Are you serious about becoming a mature risk intelligent organization? Because if you are, the following things will need to change within the board and the exco. And that's firstly, that their whole decision-making process will have to change. Boards make decisions without those decisions being supported by any sort of risk information. Again, I'm generalizing, but I'm pretty much 70, 80% there. I've done far too many risk maturity assessments to know that it does not happen out there. So the first thing is that the board must know what they need. not just what they want. It's more than a risk register, Arthur. So that's my first practical suggestion, is that the board needs to be educated in what they need to see. Second thing is the board needs to understand what it means to say, I've got an effective risk management program. They need to understand what it means. They also need to understand what it means when King says that you will take this information in consideration, not just for risk, but also for opportunity. And the onerous setting of, or the onerous responsibility of setting appetite, and then not caring about it until we have to reset the appetite as part of a document review process. And then the last one is having a chief risk, or to have a risk outfit that understands the difference between a risk register and the effect of uncertainty on objectives. So those would be my 5 top success factors that will get a board and an exco going. But again, I suppose the one thing that supersedes all of that is the risk culture. If a board and exco, and that's why when I do a risk maturity assessment, like I'm repeating myself, first slide says, are you serious about this? Do you understand what it will mean if you agree to all my recommendations? Do you want to see what it would look like? Yeah, so Arthur, I hope I answered your question. Anonymous, is risk proportional to size of organization, i.e. the bigger and complexity, the larger the risk? Sure. I suppose the gut feel answer is yes, because it has to do with the volume, complexity, and the different entry and exit points that you have to cover. So if you have a vertically integrated organization that does many different processes, many different products and services, etc., I do believe the answer is yes. However, there is a large or a huge opportunity to leverage off the existing ERM, the enterprise resource management framework within the organization. You don't have to have a 50-odd people outfit. You may be able to manage that number by virtue of collaboration, virtual linking, and virtual integration. Anonymous, how do we mitigate for the halo effect around the boardroom where some directors do not really understand issues, but because of the professional vanity? I'm going to, I suppose there must be an IOD person that can answer this. I am your best person to answer this, but I'm also your worst person. For those that don't know me, I used to be the CRO for, or at least the head of risk in ESCOM. We didn't call, it wasn't called the CRO. And this is such a painful personal experience. And maybe we can take this offline because it's a long discussion, but I would also like to see if the IOD maybe has a view on that. But the idea would be, and this is a couple of personal lessons, if I can share those. Firstly, the board awareness needs to be addressed irrespective of whether they like it or not. You have to make sure that the board awareness and the board education around risk management, especially with regard to King, are done regularly, and that the board understands. And this is the key of my answer. Sometimes boards don't understand their accountability and their responsibility as part of the board risk committee and as part of the board when it comes to risk. And putting that out there and having robust debates about that is a good starting point. Anthony Julie's, how to determine current execution capability for interactive risk management. I wonder if Anthony can get online and just help me with a little bit more detail. How to determine current execution capability for interactive risk management. Anthony, can you just give me a little bit more there? Okay, I'll come back to that one.
Chris, we are at 10 o'clock now.
Oh, okay.
If you want to maybe pick one or two last questions and just to maybe put some input on the last one where you wanted some IOD input. From my view, I think it's about having a good board culture and dynamic where questions can be raised. And like you mentioned, the key is having directors aware of what their actual roles and responsibilities are, as well as the business judgment role. And ensuring that you've got a actual plan in place for director development. And if there's a feeling that this is happening, then place an hour on the board meeting to talk about this risk so that you can also inform and develop directors. Also, your annual peer review of directors as well should also highlight some of these things and highlight where there are skills development that may be needed for certain board members. But I think try and have open discussions around this may also help ease some of the issues there.
Okay, thanks, Vakeshni. I want to respond, if I may. If you say it's 10 o'clock, let me quickly then just respond to Walter Ilrich's question. Chris, in your opinion, are the current crop of CROs up to interacting at this integrated level? If not, what should or could they be doing to build capability and credibility? Walter, I would like to respond to that in light of a question that was also raised by Fikile. Fikile was saying 20, 30, 50, but we get channeled by 30, we get bogged down by 30. My answer to Walter would be, I don't think so, Walter. I think we are, the word indoctrinated may be perceived to be negative, but we are conditioned to report a risk register irrespective of, what else. And we are conditioned to report this every quarter. And so the ability well, firstly, I don't think they are. Secondly, they know they should be. We've been talking about this for far too long. Thirdly, yes, the collaboration with ASA, with the IOD, with and IRMSA, the education with the universities, all of the training, Institute for Futures Research, all of the training we've been making available. But no, we don't. And the other thing also is because we're not taking our space, Walter, we're not stepping into that breach, and we're not challenging the paradigm enough. We are too easily guided into that the risk register is what we should be doing. And therefore, all of this predictive capability, all the scenario thinking, we hear them at breakfast and we hear them at conferences, but we really don't take it back because nobody is insisting on this. And thank you, Vakeshni, for that offer, because if we can get boards to understand what they actually should be asking for, that would be the inertia to start challenging CROs, challenging their skills base, and challenging their products and their services that they deliver. And then ultimately, I think the most important thing would be challenging the timeousness of the information that we are presenting to the leaderships. So Walter, I hope I gave you some information there. Wow, there's still a lot of questions. Maybe what I could do, Vakeshni, is if we can get this, I can take time in the next week or so and respond to each of these individuals in writing.
Great. That
or maybe do a phone call to each of them and have a conversation.
Great, that will be useful. I think we will have everyone's emails that have posted a question, so you can definitely get in contact with them by email. Before we end, I actually want to share some news to those that are still online. Talking about strategy and risk. IRMSA and the IOD has actually collaborated to create a strategy and a risk facilitated workshop to actually help boards go through these discussions. And risks, I see you've taken away your video, but please look after this. It has come as a request from members as well. And I don't know if you want to say anything about the workshop and what they could expect from the risk element, but what you've been talking about today is actually the intention behind having this joint strategy and risk facilitation to help not necessarily give you the answers, but at least facilitate the questions and the discussions that the board should be looking at and asking in this situation. Do you want to add anything to that, Chris?
Yes, thank you. And thank you for the people that are still hanging around. The question, there were two questions. Walter's was the one, there were actually three questions that were asking about more detail. And so we've built ourselves, IRMSA and the IOD got together and we are planning a workshop with a strategy discussion in the morning and a risk discussion in the afternoon. And this is going to be IRMSA talking to boards from a risk management perspective and unpacking those, so for example, what does the word effective risk management mean? What does it mean? What does effective risk management look like? And if that is what it is, what should you insist on seeing in your board pack, so that at the end of time, you can put up your hand and say, we've actually executed effective risk management. And so Vikeshini, indeed, we're going to take this presentation and we are going to then unpack this into examples of what a board agenda specific to a board risk committee should look like, what should the deliverables in that board pack look like, and what is the purpose of each of those deliverables, and where and what must they look for the value proposition locked up into those. And that's going to be a 4-hour session coming up sometime soon.
Yeah. I'm very excited about it, and I think this is something people have been asking for. So please look out for our mail and marketing. It will be going out shortly. I have also, if you take our survey at the end, I have put a question there. If you are interested to get that information, you can click yes, and as soon as that proposal with the scope and the potential fees are released, you will get the information immediately. So thank you everyone for joining us. Also, one last thing around, so you mentioned scenario planning, Chris, and the ID has actually joined a research firm that's actually looking into that and surveying both members and non-members. So you can actually look out for a potential report around how to look at scenario planning based on what organizations are actually currently doing. And we will be having a webinar event on that in the early parts of July. So I think it's on the 2nd of July that webinar is set up. So look out for that as well. I think more to come and follow based on the topics that we've discussed today. Thank you everyone for joining us. Please do complete our survey at the end. Chris's contact details with the IRMSA website is on your screen, and you will receive an email from us with the recording and slides that have been used today, as well as Chris's contact details if you want to get in touch with him. So thank you, and we'll see you all again next week, same time. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Vikeshini.